My name is Sarah, and I've always been the quiet one in our family. Growing up, I was constantly overshadowed by my cousin Jake. He was the golden child, the one everyone adored. Funny, good-looking, and outgoing, Jake was the life of every family gathering. Being the only boy among a sea of girl cousins only added to his charm in our family's eyes. From a young age, I struggled with hearing problems. It wasn't something I talked about much, partly because I didn't want to draw attention to myself, and partly because it felt like no one really cared. Jake's boisterous laughter and constant pranks always seemed to drown out my softer voice. As we grew older, the divide between us only widened. While Jake continued to be the center of attention, I focused on my education and career. By the time I was 27, I had a stable job in finance that I'd worked hard for. It allowed me to finally address my hearing issues properly. The day I got my new hearing aids was life-changing. They cost $6,000, but to me, they were priceless. For the first time in years, I could hear clearly without straining. The world suddenly seemed so much richer, full of sounds I'd been missing out on. I didn't tell many people about my hearing aids. They were small and discreet, and I liked it that way. I thought maybe, just maybe, I could start participating more in family conversations, now that I could hear them properly. Little did I know that my next family gathering would change everything. It was my grandmother's 80th birthday party. The whole family had gathered at her house, a charming two-story home, with a spacious backyard and a pool. Grandma had always loved having us all together, and this was no exception. I arrived early to help set up. As I arranged chairs on the back porch, I could hear the distant sound of a lawnmower from the neighbor's yard, the chirping of birds in the old oak tree, and the gentle splash of the pool filter. These were all sounds I'd struggled to hear before, and I couldn't help but smile. As the afternoon wore on, more family members arrived. Aunts, uncles, cousins. The house was soon buzzing with activity. And then, of course, Jake arrived. At 25, Jake was still every bit the golden boy he'd always been. He sauntered in with his girlfriend, Melissa, who was holding their 6-month-old son, Ethan. Jake immediately became the center of attention, regaling everyone with stories of his latest escapades. I tried to focus on helping Grandma and catching up with some of my other cousins, but I couldn't help overhearing snippets of Jake's conversation. He was talking about how he was struggling to balance his part-time job at a call center with his college classes. I felt a twinge of sympathy. It couldn't be easy juggling work, school, and a new baby. As the party moved to the backyard, I found myself relaxing a bit. The sound of the breeze rustling through the trees, the clink of ice in glasses, the murmur of conversations, it was all so clear now. I was even able to join in a conversation with my Aunt Linda about her recent trip to Europe, without having to ask her to repeat herself every other sentence. That's when I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned to see Jake grinning at me, that mischievous glint in his eye that always spelled trouble. "Hey cuz," he said, his words slightly slurred. I could smell the beer on his breath. "You're looking way too dry. How about a swim?" I immediately tensed up. "No, Jake," I said firmly. "I don't want to swim. I'm fine as I am." But Jake wasn't listening. He started to grab me, trying to lift me up. I struggled against him, my heart racing. "Jake, stop," I said, my voice rising. "Put me down. I'm serious." I could see some of our family members looking over, but no one was intervening. They probably thought it was just Jake being Jake, always the life of the party. "Come on, Sarah," Jake laughed. "Live a little." Before I could protest further, I felt myself being lifted off the ground. In a panic, I reached for my ears, trying to protect my hearing aids, but it was too late. Jake had already started moving towards the pool. "Jake, no! Stop!" I shouted, my tone deadly serious now. But it was useless. With a great heave, Jake tossed me into the pool. I hit the water with a splash, immediately feeling the shock of the cold water. As I surfaced, sputtering and gasping, I could hear laughter from the party guests, but all I could focus on was the absence of sound in my ears. I swam to the edge of the pool, pulling myself out as quickly as I could. Water streamed from my hair. My clothes clung to me uncomfortably, but all I cared about were my hearing aids. Jake was standing there, still laughing. "See? A little water never hurt anyone." I reached up to my ears, my hands shaking. The hearing aids were soaked. I pulled them out, staring at them in dismay. They weren't working. $6,000. Gone in an instant. "You idiot," I shouted at Jake, my voice sounding muffled to my own ears. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Jake's laughter faded as he saw the small devices in my hand. "What are those?" he asked, his brow furrowing. "They're hearing aids," I said, my voice trembling with anger and unshed tears. "They cost $6,000, and you just ruined them." The backyard had gone quiet. I could feel everyone's eyes on us, but I didn't care. Years of frustration with Jake, a feeling overlooked and dismissed came bubbling to the surface. "Oh," Jake said, his face falling. I didn't know you had hearing aids now." "Well, now you do," I snapped. "And you're going to replace them." Jake's expression changed from shock to defensiveness. "Whoa, hold on," he said, holding up his hands. "That was an accident. I can't afford to pay for those." "You should have thought of that before you threw me in the pool," I retorted. Our family members started to gather around us, murmuring amongst themselves. Aunt Linda stepped forward, always the peacemaker. Now," she said soothingly. "I'm sure we can work this out. Sarah, honey, you know Jake didn't mean any harm. And Jake, you really should be more careful." I turned to her, incredulous. "Are you serious? He ruined my hearing aids. Do you have any idea how much these cost?" "Of course, dear," Aunt Linda said, patting my arm. "But you know Jake's situation. He's in college, working part-time, with a new baby. He can't possibly afford to replace them." I looked around at my family members' faces. I saw sympathy, yes, but not for me. They were all looking at Jake with concern, as if he was the victim here. "I don't care," I said, my voice hard. "He did this. He needs to take responsibility for it." Jake scoffed. "Come on, Sarah. You make way more money than I do. Can't you just buy new ones?" I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. "Are you serious right now? You destroy my property and expect me to just shrug it off because I can afford to replace it?" "It was an accident," Jake protested. "An accident you caused by not listening to me when I told you to stop," I countered. The argument continued, voices rising. Some family members tried to intervene, mostly on Jake's behalf. I heard phrases like, "Family should stick together, and it's only money being thrown around." But to me, it wasn't just about the money. It was about respect, about consequences for actions. In the end, I left the party early, still damp and seething with anger. As I drove home, the silence in my car was deafening, a stark reminder of what I'd lost. Over the next few days, I tried to get Jake to agree to pay for the hearing aids. I even offered to let him pay in installments. But he refused, insisting it was an accident, and that I should just cover it myself, since I could afford it. That's when I made the decision to take him to small claims court. The day of the court hearing was tense. I arrived early, dressed in my most professional outfit. As I waited outside the courtroom, I saw Jake arrive with Melissa. He looked tired and stressed, his usual cocky demeanor subdued. When our case was called, we presented our sides to the judge. I explained about my hearing problems, the cost of the hearing aids, and how Jake had ignored my protests before throwing me in the pool. Jake argued that it was an accident, that he didn't know about the hearing aids, and that he couldn't afford to pay for them. The judge listened patiently to both sides before making her decision. In the end, she ruled in my favor. Jake was ordered to pay the full cost of replacing the hearing aids. As we left the courtroom, Jake approached me. "Sarah, come on," he pleaded. "You know I can't afford this. Can't we work something out?" I looked at him, remembering all the times he'd dismissed me, all the pranks, all the times the family had taken his side. "You should have thought of that before," I said coldly. "You have the court's decision. I expect you to follow it." In the weeks that followed, I waited for Jake to start making payments, but nothing came. No money, no apology, not even an acknowledgement of the court's decision. Finally, after a month of silence, I decided to take further legal action. I filed for wage garnishment, a process that would automatically deduct the owed amount from Jake's paychecks. The day I received confirmation that the wage garnishment had been approved, I felt a mixture of vindication and unease. I knew this would hit Jake hard financially, but I couldn't bring myself to feel too sorry for him. He had made his choices, and now he had to face the consequences. It wasn't long before I started hearing from other family members. Aunt Linda called first, her voice tight with disapproval. "Sarah, honey," she said, "I heard about what you did to Jake. Don't you think this is going too far?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice level. Jake ruined my hearing aids and refused to take responsibility. The court agreed with me. I'm just following through on their decision. "But Sarah," Aunt Linda persisted, "you know Jake's situation. He's had to drop out of college because of this. He's working extra shifts, just to make rent. Think about little Ethan." I felt a twinge of guilt at the mention of Jake's son, but I pushed it aside. "I'm sorry that Jake's choices are affecting his family," I said, "but that doesn't change the fact that he owes me this money." Similar calls came from other relatives. My Uncle Bob was particularly harsh, accusing me of being selfish and vindictive. Even my parents, who had initially supported my decision to go to court, were now suggesting that maybe I should let it go. But I stood firm. Years of being overlooked, of having my needs dismissed in favor of Jake's wants, had hardened my resolve. For once, I was standing up for myself, and I wasn't going to back down. Weeks turned into months. family gatherings became tense affairs, with clear battle lines drawn. Some relatives, like my cousin Emma, quietly supported me. Others made their disapproval clear, either through cold shoulders or outright confrontation. Jake, for his part, seemed to be struggling. I heard through the family grapevine that he was working 2 jobs now, trying to make ends meet. Melissa had taken on extra shifts at her job too, leaving little Ethan with Jake's parents most of the time. Despite the pressure from my family, I didn't waver. The wage garnishment continued, slowly but surely paying off the debt for my hearing aids. It was at my parents' anniversary party, about 6 months after the garnishment began, that things came to a head. I had been hesitant to attend, knowing that Jake would be there, but my parents had insisted. The tension in the room was palpable from the moment I arrived. I could feel the stares, hear the whispers. Jake was there with Melissa and Ethan, looking tired and resentful. As the evening wore on, I tried to keep to myself, making small talk with the few relatives who were still speaking to me normally. But then, as we were all gathered in the living room for a toast, Jake suddenly stood up. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice loud in the sudden silence. "Sarah, you've made your point. You've won. Are you happy now?" All eyes turned to me. I felt my face flush, but I met Jake's gaze steadily. "This isn't about winning, Jake," I said. "It's about taking responsibility for your actions." Jake laughed bitterly. "Responsibility? You want to talk about responsibility? I'm working 2 jobs. I had to drop out of school. I barely see my son. All because of a stupid prank." "A prank that cost me $6,000, I retorted. "A prank that you never sincerely apologized for, never tried to make right until the court forced you to." The room erupted into argument. Family members took sides, voices raised. I heard accusations of selfishness, of cruelty. I heard defenses of family loyalty, of the importance of forgiveness. In the midst of the chaos, I noticed little Ethan starting to cry, overwhelmed by the noise and tension. Without thinking, I went to him, picking him up and moving to a quieter corner of the room. As I held Ethan, trying to soothe him, I felt a presence beside me. It was Melissa, Jake's girlfriend. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said softly, "for all of this." I looked at her, surprised. It was the first genuine apology I'd heard from anyone in Jake's corner. "Jake, he's not a bad person," Melissa continued. He's always been the golden boy, you know? He's never had to face consequences like this before. It's been hard for him to accept." I nodded, understanding despite myself. "I know," I said. "But that's part of the problem. He's always gotten away with things, and everyone's always made excuses for him." Melissa sighed. "You're right. And I think this has been a wake-up call for him. He's been talking about trying to go back to school, about being more responsible. He wants to be a better role model for Ethan." I looked down at the baby in my arms, now calm and looking up at me with curious eyes. For the first time, I felt a flicker of doubt about my hardline stance. "I never wanted to hurt Ethan," I said quietly. "Or you. This was between me and Jake." Melissa nodded. "I know. And Jake knows too, even if he won't admit it. He messed up, big time. But is there any way we could work something out? Maybe a different payment plan? Jake's willing to take on even more work if it means he can go back to school." I considered her words carefully. The anger that had fueled me for months was still there, but it was tempered now by a growing realization of the wider impact of this situation. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "I can't promise anything, but I'll think about it." Melissa gave me a small, grateful smile. "Thank you," she said. "That's all I ask." As the party wound down, I found myself deep in thought. The family drama swirled around me, but for once, I felt somewhat removed from it. I was starting to see a bigger picture, one that went beyond just me and Jake. Over the next few weeks, I did a lot of soul-searching. I thought about Jake, about Ethan, about the whole concept of family and forgiveness. I thought about my own role in this drama, wondering if my pursuit of justice had turned into something else along the way. Finally, after much deliberation, I reached out to Jake. We met at a neutral location, a small coffee shop halfway between our homes. The atmosphere was tense at first, both of us unsure how to begin. "I've been thinking," I said finally, breaking the uncomfortable silence, "about everything that's happened." Jake nodded, his expression guarded. "Me too," he admitted. "Sarah, I'm sorry. Really sorry. Not just for the hearing aids, but for a lot of things." I was taken aback by the sincerity in his voice. It was the first time I'd heard a genuine apology from him. "I've been a jerk," Jake continued. "Not just that day at the pool, but for years. I never really thought about how my actions affected others, especially you. This whole situation. It's been a wake-up call." I listened, surprised by Jake's newfound self-awareness. "I appreciate you saying that," I said cautiously. It means a lot to hear you acknowledge it. We talked for hours, really talked, for what felt like the first time in our lives. Jake opened up about the pressure he felt to always be the fun, carefree one in the family. I shared how overlooked and dismissed I'd often felt. It was a raw, honest conversation that we should have had years ago. By the end of our meeting, we'd come to an agreement. I would reduce the wage garnishment to a more manageable amount, allowing Jake to return to school part-time. In return, Jake committed to paying off the debt in full, even if it took longer, and to making a genuine effort to change his behavior. The next family gathering was still tense, but different. As Jake and I explained our agreement, there was a palpable sense of relief in the room. Some family members were still skeptical, but most seemed grateful that the conflict was being resolved. Over the following months, Jake stuck to our agreement. He returned to school, worked hard at his job, and made regular payments. More importantly, he made an effort to be more considerate, not just to me, but to everyone in the family. Our relationship was far from perfect, but it was improving. We were learning to communicate better, to understand and respect each other's boundaries. The incident with the hearing aids, painful as it had been, had forced us to confront and begin to heal long-standing family dynamics. A year after our coffee shop conversation, at another family gathering, I watched Jake playing with his son Ethan. He caught my eye and gave me a small, grateful smile. I smiled back, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in a long time. The hearing aid incident had caused a lot of pain and conflict, but it had also been a catalyst for change. Our family wasn't perfect, but we were learning, growing, and healing together. And in the end, that's what family is all about.